everyone, welcome to Grammar Recap number 3. So today we're going to be going over grammar lessons 5 through 6. And so let's just get started with lesson 5. In lesson 5 we covered pronoun reference and modifying errors. So for pronoun reference, what do we mean by pronoun reference? So clear reference requires that the reader will be able to easily find a one-word antecedent to which the pronoun refers. So after Olivia washes the dishes, she puts them away. The antecedent for she is Olivia and for them is the dishes. She refers to Olive and them refers to dishes. By having pronoun reference, it also allows the sentence to roll off easier on the tongue. So rather than saying after Olivia washes the dishes, Olivia puts the dishes away, it's much easier to just read after Olivia washes the dishes, she puts them away. We know what she and them are referring to in the context of the sentence, and it makes the sentence more concise and practical. However, there are two problems that are commonly made when dealing with pronoun reference. We have ambiguous and vague reference. So ambiguous reference is defined as when there is more than one word to which the pronoun could refer to, and vague reference is when the antecedent is implied but it cannot be located. So an example of an ambiguous reference: when teachers have to fail students, they are not happy. So in this sentence, the reader can always assume what they is really referring to, but if we look at the sentence a step back, we don't really have a clear idea of what they is referring to. Is they referring to the teachers, or is it referring to the students? The sentence could be saying that the teachers aren't happy or that the students aren't happy. There are several different kinds of vague reference. The most common takes a whole clause as antecedent for the pronouns which, this, and that. Also, again, because this is just a recap, for more in detail and in-depth examples, I definitely recommend checking out lesson 5, the full lesson, not just the recap. But for more vague references, we have he said he had gone to see the flowers, which was a lie. Elizabeth suddenly shrieked, and that made everyone jump. In both of these sentences, the pronoun refers to the whole main clause. Such a construction is acceptable in conversation, but it is not formal in writing. One solution is put in a word that would act as an antecedent. One solution is to put in a word that would act as an antecedent as follows. Elizabeth suddenly shrieked, and that made everyone jump. Here we can fix it to Elizabeth let out a sudden shriek, and that made everyone jump. Now that refers to the word shriek, but there's a shorter way. You can just eliminate the pronoun, and then you get the sentence, Elizabeth's sudden shriek made everyone jump. Or we can just say, it made everyone jump when Elizabeth suddenly shrieked. Sorry, I can't say that word. So these last two sentences are more concise, and they are still straightforward sentences that mean the same thing as this longer, a bit more confusing sentence, which is also grammatically incorrect. So by having either of the two following sentences, there are of course other ways that you can reconstruct it, but if we just say, I like this sentence more, Elizabeth's sudden shriek made everyone jump, it's very to the point. We know who's shrieking, we know what it did and what actions it caused. So now just to go over some quick rules for vague reference. Again, I don't have the example sentences and details I would go into if this were the regular lesson, but since it's a recap, I'll just be reading the rules. There are a number of ways to restructure a sentence. Any will do as long as it preserves the intended meaning and emphasis. Just remember which, this, and that must have specific single word antecedents. Rule number 2, be careful with words it and they, as they can cause confusion in your sentence. And I go over this rule more in detail on the next slide. And rule number 3, either make the reference clear and unambiguous by supplying a single one-word antecedent, or else get rid of the pronoun. Always reread your new sentence to be sure that it makes sense. So to revisit rule number 2 between the words it and they, so in today's Times, it says that the club did extraordinarily well on their most recent fundraiser. In my textbook, they use too many complicated terms. What is it? Who are they? There is no clear answer in both of these sentences, so just get rid of the pronoun. If we get rid of the pronoun, then I have the two original sentences pasted up here. So the original sentence, in today's Times, it says the club did extraordinarily well on their most recent fundraiser. If we just get rid of the pronoun, then we have an article in today's Times says that the club did extraordinarily well on their most recent fundraiser. This sentence doesn't have the word "it" in it, and it's much more straightforward and clear to the reader, and it just gets the point across. So the same thing, eliminating the pronoun, was done in the second sentence. Rather than saying, in my textbook, they use too many complicated terms. We don't know who they is. We can just say, my textbook uses too many complicated terms. So often, the solution to fixing vague reference is just to get rid of the pronoun. So now we have some more sentences, practice sentences. So number 1, Luke steals from his brother, which is a shameful action. We have the word which here, and it's referring to this entire act of Luke stealing from his brother. We can make the sentence more straightforward and clear and grammatically correct if we correct it to, Luke stealing from his brother is a shameful action. Now we know directly what is the shameful action, and it's Luke stealing. Sentence number 2, Olivia always cleans the guts out of fish before eating them. In this sentence, we don't know exactly what them is referring to. Is she eating the guts or is she eating the fish? So the sentence would be corrected to, this is just one of the many ways. With pronoun reference in general, there are many different ways to fix the sentence. It just really is up to the writer and how they want to position the words or the clauses or the adverbs and pronouns. So I'm just giving examples that work, but there are so many other ways. So if it's not the one that's written here, it doesn't mean that it's incorrect, as long as you know directly what the author is talking about. So since we don't know what them is in sentence number 2, we can correct the sentence to, before Olivia eats fish, she always cleans the guts out of them. So we know first introduced here that she eats the fish, but then we go on to more details to saying that she cleans the guts out of them. So we know what she's eating and what she's cleaning, and we don't have any confusion between the two. For sentence number 3, in Charles' fistfight with Pete, he was seriously injured. So to correct the sentence, you would write, Pete was seriously injured in the fistfight with Charles. So because fistfight is placed in between the two names here in the beginning, we have Charles' fistfight with Pete. We don't know who exactly was seriously injured, so we would put the word he and just actually get rid of it from the sentence, so we just have no pronoun. So then it would just say that who exactly was whatever verb seriously injured, and then we have the following clause just describing it. So if we just put the name first here and say who directly was seriously injured in his fistfight with Charles, then we know what happened between the two, and there's no confusion if we get rid of the pronoun. For sentence 4, after the group released rats in City Hall, they were arrested. So the group was arrested after they released rats in City Hall. Here we know what group, well, the group versus the rats, who were arrested, and then we know what they did. So there's no confusion between if either the rats or the group were arrested in City Hall. Sentence number 5, when Blake compares herself to Miss Samantha, it is clear she is the more creative writer. We don't know who she is. She could be Blake or Miss Samantha. Compared to Blake, Miss Samantha is the more creative writer would be the correct sentence, because now we know who the creative writer is. It's Miss Samantha, and we're just saying it's compared to Blake. So now we're going to be going on to the second sub-lesson in Lesson 5, which was modifying errors. So modifiers are adjectives and adverbs or phrases and clauses acting as such. A modifier needs to attach itself clearly and unambiguously to the word it modifies. So just to go over how these are working. So we have sentence number 1, Lily is a violent woman. She howls madly. We have adjective, adverb. It corresponds directly to the underlined words or phrases. Lily is a violent woman who howls madly is an adjective clause. Lily howls, because she is filled with evil energy, adverb clause. Lily howls at the moon, that's an adverb phrase. Lily howls at the man in the moon is an adjective phrase. Lily is a woman to avoid would be a infinitive phrase acting as an adjective. It would act as an adverb if we have Lily howls to ease her longings. And the last sentence, locked at the top of the tower, Lily howls is a participle phrase. So some rules for modifying errors. You have to be sure that the modifier is placed so it modifies the word intended and not another word. You should also be careful with the following adverbs: even, only, almost, not, never, ever, again, often, nearly, hardly, just. Sorry, I switched these two, but this is just a list to keep in mind when you're working with modifiers. So I like to go over this example. I have this exact slide in the lesson 5 slide, so you will see that there, but I like this example because it shows the importance and the impact a adverb or an adjective can have to a sentence simply just by moving its position in the sentence. So in sentence number 1, only Abby buys bagels on Sunday means that no one but Abby buys bagels on Sunday. So not Chuck or not Alex or Andrew, anyone else, it's only Abby. But sentence number 2, if we put the only after Abby and before buys, we have Abby only buys bagels on Sunday. So she does not eat them until a different day, and she doesn't eat them on Sunday. So she just buys them. She doesn't do anything with them. The sentence is implying that all she's doing is only buying. Sentence number 3, putting only after the word buys and before bagels, reads Abby buys only bagels on Sunday. So that means she doesn't buy anything. She doesn't do anything but buy bagels. So she buys only bagels. And then the last sentence, if we put only after bagels and before the word on, we have Abby buys bagels only on Sunday. So she never buys bagels on Monday or Saturday. She only buys them on Sunday, and that's the only day that she will buy them. So this slide, I really like. It just shows the importance of your modifier and its impact it can have on the sentence. Although it seems like a minuscule detail, it's very, very crucial that you are seeing where you're putting these verbs and modifiers. Adjectives and adverbs. And where you place them can really impact and completely change the idea of your sentence. So rules 3 and 4, we have avoid placing a modifier where it might modify one of 2 different words. An ambiguous modifier is like an ambiguous pronoun reference. It is not clear which of the 2 words is being modified. Again, for more examples, recommend going to the lesson, but since we're just listing the rules, I'm going to move on to rule number 4, avoid placing a modifier where it quote-unquote dangles. This is known as a dangling modifier, without a clear single word to modify. So dangling modifier, basically what it sounds like, the modifier is dangling, meaning that it doesn't really modify a specific word, basically saying that the sentence is not clear and the modifier is not really the modifier could be doing its job, the writer is not putting it in the right position for the reader to understand. So we have some practice sentences with modifying errors. The mailman who tripped him yesterday was told to apologize. Here, again, modifiers can definitely rely on what the author wants to say, so it could be correct as is with sentence 1. Actually, no, it's not correct because this one is a bit vague and we don't really know what's being modified, but in certain cases, I believe I have a sentence later on, not in these, where you can see that the author can choose technically what word placement is correct. But here, the mailman who tripped him yesterday was told to apologize. If we move yesterday to before the word tripped, the sentence would read, the mailman who yesterday tripped him was told to apologize. It tells us when and what happened, and it's just more straightforward. Sentence number 2, he nearly wrote a whole book on the subject, can be changed to, he wrote nearly a whole book on the subject. So we changed the placement of the word nearly to after wrote rather than before, changing the sentence saying he wrote nearly, so almost an entire book, not he almost wrote a whole book. So sentence 2 is saying he already wrote or started writing. Here it's saying he almost wrote or started writing this whole book. Sentence number 3, while standing in front of a bar, a truck splashed gin. The sentence can be corrected to, while he was standing in front of a bar, Jim was splashed by a truck. So compared to the other sentences, again, it's very similar because we're really just changing the placement of a word. So we're moving Jim here. So while he was standing in front of a bar, and we're also adding he here just to introduce our subject beforehand, making it more clear, we have, while he was standing in front of the bar, Jim was splashed by a truck. So we know who was splashed. Sentence number 4, those who read quickly forget what they've read. So rather than just changing a word around like the other sentences, we actually just kind of rewrite the sentence, and this also again goes to prove that there are many different ways of correcting the sentence. So then the sentence would read, if people read quickly, they forget what they've read. So there's no confusion between, oh, are they forgetting quickly or are they reading quickly? So by fixing it, then we know that quickly is modifying read. So people who read quickly, go through a book quick, will forget what they've read. And the last sentence, the teacher that Tommy angered frequently made the boy's life miserable. Is he being frequently angered, or is he frequently making the boy's life miserable? That is a big problem with the sentence, and a way to fix this would basically be writing, the teacher that Tommy frequently angered made the boy's life miserable. So we have that Tommy frequently angered as an adjective for the teacher. It's describing the teacher, so we know that Tommy was frequently angering this teacher, and the teacher made the boy's life miserable. He didn't make it miserable frequently, he just made it miserable. So now we're going to be moving on to lesson 6, and lesson 6 covered punctuation with essential and non-essential elements, punctuation with essential and non-essential adverb clauses, and verb forms, just a quick brief intro to them, and then we're going to be going over verb forms in detail, or at least to some extent, on the lesson 7 recap coming out later this week. So first, for essential and non-essential, I couldn't come up with example sentences for this just because, with this topic, it's more of identifying what is essential and non-essential, and rather compared to what we just went over, this is also, not rather, what I was saying before is that this is a topic where the writer can choose what is essential and non-essential. So again, this topic is very heavily based on context. You can't just say there's a definitive correct or incorrect answer. So then, let's just get into essential and non-essential. Modifying phrases and clauses can be seen as either essential to the sentence or as non-essential. If non-essential, they merely add information that can be cut without loss of meaning. If essential, however, deleting them radically changes the meaning of the sentence. So just to quickly interject, it's very self-explanatory with the words themselves. If it's essential, it's necessary and it needs to be in the sentence. If it's not essential, you can dispose of it. It does not need to be in your sentence. To check if you have removed, sorry, I wrote if there twice. To check if you have removed the correct phrase or clause, simply check the sentence after you have removed it, or after you have removed the modifying phrase. If it doesn't make sense, the phrase was essential, you need to put it back in the sentence. If you removed it and the idea of the sentence does not change, then the phrase was not essential in the first place, and you can just leave it deleted. So if your sentence still makes it, this is what I just said, but if your sentence still makes the same basic statement, the element was not essential. If it now leaves you with important questions unanswered or says something markedly different, the element was essential, and you add it back into your sentence. So because I don't really have like example sentences to correct, we can just go through these two sentences, and the only difference are the commas, but they drastically change the sentence. So the first sentence, the girls who are hungry are running to the cafeteria. We have who are hungry kind of marked off from the sentence with commas. So the first sentence tells us that all the girls are running to the cafeteria, and we are told as additional information that they are hungry. If you were to take out the who clause, the basic statement will remain unchanged. The girls are running to the cafeteria. Therefore, the clause who are hungry is non-essential and thus set off by commas. So who are hungry is just a additional fact, a little descriptive part that adds to the sentence, the girls, or just adds the description of who these girls are. However, if we look in the second sentence, the girls who are hungry are running to the cafeteria. So here, in the second sentence, the who clause limits the girls under discussion to those who are hungry. Now, it is only they, the girls who are hungry, and not all the girls who are running to the cafeteria. The clause in the second sentence is essential. To show this, you do not set it off with commas. So again, essential, you do not set it off, and non-essential, you can just set it off. So even though this new sentence kind of can read similar to this, you just have to keep in mind the punctuation importance and also what the author is trying to say. This sentence is talking about just the girls who are hungry, and here it's just a little fact that the girls that are running to the cafeteria happen to be the ones that are hungry. So now punctuation with essential and non-essential elements. We have some rules. 1, set off non-essential participle phrases with commas. 2, note that all infinitive phrases that work as adjectives are essential and all that work as adverbs are non-essential. And then 3, do you and your reader already know who or what is being discussed? If yes, then the phrases or clause is non-essential and is thus set off by commas. So the next topic, the title is a little similar, but it's punctuation with essential and non-essential adverb clauses rather than elements. Okay, so rule number 1, adverb clauses are introduced by subordinating conjunctions such as because, although, if, when, whereas, before, after, and many others. Rule number 2, set off a non-essential adverb clause with a comma. Rule number 3, when the adverb clause introduces a sentence, it is always set off by a comma, whether it is essential or non-essential. And then for rule number 4, when a prepositional phrase introduces a sentence, it is never set off unless it is very long or includes another prepositional phrase inside of it. And there are a few more rules on the next slide. Number 5, clauses stating an opposing or contrasting fact are usually, not always, not essential and are set off by commas. Clauses introduced by the words when and while are non-essential and they are used to state an when used to state an opposing or contrasting fact. Rule number 7, clauses that name a time, including clauses introduced by when and while, are usually essential. Clauses that begin with as or since are essential when they name a time. Okay, and the last set of rules, sorry, there's a lot for this one, but number 9, when clauses that begin with as or since explain a reason, they are non-essential. And for 10, I gave a little example because it can't just be confusing to read the rule by itself, but this goes along for all the other rules. If you're confused, I recommend going and checking out lesson number 6. But rule number 10, clauses beginning with so that are essential when they define a purpose, but non-essential when they define a result. So here where there's a purpose would be, she stayed up all night so that she could listen to the album right when it came out. So that is a purpose. A result would be the album was actually coming out next week, so that she was disappointed. And then rule number 11, the final rule before we go on to some example sentences, adverb clauses of comparison are always, always, always essential. So now to go over the font is different here, I just realized that, but to go over the example sentences, number 1, most of the books that Donna wrote are good enough to be published. So in the original sentence, we see that Donna wrote is set off by commas, meaning that it's implying that the phrase is not essential. So that would mean that if we remove the phrase that Donna wrote, the sentence would have the same exact meaning. So if we remove that Donna wrote, we would read most of the books are good enough to be published. That is definitely a drastically different sentence and meaning as the first sentence had, where we had that Donna wrote, so that we know that Donna wrote, sorry for repeating myself, but we know that the phrase that Donna wrote is essential to the sentence, so then we would just get rid of the commas and just have most of the books that Donna wrote are good enough to be published. We're not talking about all of the books ever, sorry, not all of them, most of the books ever are good enough to be published. We're talking about most of the books that Donna wrote are good enough to be published. So this is a very, it's a similar problem with all the example sentences. So like sentence number 2, any athlete who runs every day will improve their stamina. We see commas, read it without. Any athlete will improve their stamina. That's not the same meaning the original sentence had. Therefore, it's essential. We leave the phrase there and we just remove the commas. So we would read, any athlete who runs every day will improve their stamina. Sentence number 3, the 19th century novel Great Expectations illustrates many of the customs that Dickens observed in London. Because there's commas, we try reading it without because it's implying that the commas, meaning that there's a non-essential phrase. So, the 19th century novel illustrates many of the customs that Dickens observed in London. So that sentence, again, different meaning from what we originally read, with or without the commas, but since there are commas, we're being told that it's basically a non-essential phrase, which is incorrect. It would read, the 19th century novel Great Expectations illustrates many of the customs that Dickens observed in London. We need great exceptions in the sentence so we know which novel is being talked about. So it's essential, and we do not have commas. Sentence number 4. The girls who went shopping last week ran up the stairs and had lunch together. So I just mentioned here that this phrase is non-essential. We can just be talking about, let's say I'm the author and I just want to say that we're the girls. And I already specified that these were the girls who went shopping last week in a previous sentence or whatnot. So then we can just have it commaed off, set off by commas. So then we can read, the girls ran upstairs and had lunch together. The girls who went shopping last week ran upstairs and had lunch together. Here, this is just playing as an additional detail and it's not actually essential to the sentence. So we can mark it off with commas, leave it in the sentence, or take it out. And then the last example sentence, the men and woman who tried to get tickets for the concert left the venue empty-handed and upset. Here, if we read the men and woman left the venue empty-handed and upset, we're talking about every man and every woman, which is incorrect. So then the sentence must be corrected to, the men and woman who tried to get tickets for the concert left the venue empty-handed and upset, with no commas, because we need to know which men and women. So it's an essential phrase. And then the last topic that was covered in lesson 6 was a very, very, very brief verb tense introduction. So really quick, verb tense. Verbs change their forms most importantly when they show the time at which an action took place. The form that shows this is called the tense. Here are the most important tenses and their forms and uses. So lesson 7 covers most, if not all, I believe, of verb forms, but this is just a quick chart that I'm going to be running through, and we'll revisit this in the next recap, and it's also, of course, in the full lesson 6, but it's just very useful to look back at. So present can be formed by is in the present participle. He is doing me a favor. He eats during his lesson. They are biking. And the present tense shows an action that's going on, a habitual action or general truth. Past, did, and infinitive. I took my part to the... Oh, by the way, these things in parentheses are just examples, and they're not always applying, because here I wrote did and infinitive. It's not always did. It's just past tense. So I took my dog to the park. Did she tell? The past shows an action occurring at some definite moment in the past. The future tense can be formed by will in the infinitive. We will not give up. It shows an action yet to occur. The present perfect can be formed with have or has plus a past participle, or been with a present participle. So you have lost my trust, or Lily has lived in this house. We have been living. So the present perfect shows an action that happened in the past at an undefined time. It shows an action that began in the past and is continuing into the present. The past perfect can be formed by had and a past participle. By the time summer came, he had saved up a lot of money. The past perfect is used to show an action that occurred before another action in the past. And the last tense, future perfect, can be formed with will have had, I believe, or just will have, plus a past participle. So by the time summer comes, he will have saved up a lot of money. The future perfect shows an action that will be complemented by some specified future moment. So because this is just a very super brief introduction, I will be going over in more depth this chart again, as well as more into verb tenses. But yeah, that is the recap for today. So thank you guys for watching. If there's any questions, you can leave them, and I'll try to get to them. Oh, and I will get to them. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.